Hello and welcome to the Motivational Mindset podcast with Switch Motivation and me, Richard Knight. During each episode, I'll be chatting to a variety of business leaders to understand what motivates them and what strategies and techniques they use to maintain and boost their motivation. I hope to be able to share secrets, hints and tips that will help you find and nurture your motivational mindset in 2024 and beyond. So sit back, relax, and listen to episode 1 of the Motivational Mindset podcast with the guru of motivation himself, the creator of Motivational Maps, Mr. James Sale. Enjoy.
Well, thank you very much, Richard. Well, my name is James Sale. I'm a director of Motivational Maps Limited. I actually created the product Motivational Maps back in, well, actually, it took me 5 years to create it, but the actual launch of the business was in 2006. So we've been going now for well, can you do the maths for me? 18 years. I'm also a writer. I've had over 50 books published. 5 books were published by Routledge, one of the biggest academic publishers in the world, books based on the motivational mapping process. So I co-wrote 3 of them and 2 of them I did myself. So there have been 5 books out on this particular topic. I'm also a writer for one of the biggest newspapers in America, the Epoch Times in New York. And I'm also on the advisory board of New York's Society of Classical Poets. So you might guess from that, I'm also a poet. So I have a range of interests, and all of them require energy, and energy is motivation. And to get results and to perform, we need to have plenty of motivation in our life if we're going to be productive. So I'd like to think I am productive, and that is what I do. Right.
Fantastic. And so you've mentioned motivational maps there, and people will be aware of the motivational maps from the podcast itself. But it'd be really interesting just to hear a little bit about, you mentioned you're the creator of Motivational Maps. Be interesting to hear just a little bit more about what Motivational Maps are, how it works. But how did you come up with something like that? I mean, was it sort of a sit down one day and go, I know I'm going to create this tool and it's going to be great? Or where did that come from?
Okay, well, essentially, my background is I was basically education. I was a teacher for 15 years. I ended up as a deputy headmaster of a large comprehensive school. And I left this in 1995. I'd reached the sort of end of the line of this. And I became self-employed as a trainer. And I had a lot of experience of appraisal systems. So I was effectively a management trainer, and I got into investors in people for 7 years. So I was an invested in people consultant going around. I went into literally hundreds of businesses doing this. So I was learning how to become a professional trainer with adults rather than working with children. But the thing that struck me as being really curious was when I went in to do the training, it could be appraisal training, communication skills training, that kind of thing. I was always expecting the investors in people, you always have to have all these sheets to evaluate yourself, these feedback sheets.
Yeah.
And I actually did very well with these evaluation sheets. I got high marks for them. But the thing that always struck me as being a bit odd was I thought people were going to say, James, I'm so impressed by your skills and how much you know, and you really know your stuff here. But in fact, what I kept getting was people saying, it's really motivating listening to you talking. It's really motivating. James Sale's a really motivating trainer. So this word motivation began to reach out. I thought, well, am I a motivating trainer? What is motivation? And actually, I realized it was a unique selling point, that there were many trainers there who were really experts and skillful, as I thought I was, but weren't necessarily motivational. And so this sort of grew in my mind to investigate what was motivation and how could I make this a unique selling point of my business. Now, so that was the sort of desire to do that, but there were a couple of other things as well. One of them was that I realized I was self-employed. And because I've been into hundreds of businesses, I began to realize that being self-employed is not the same as running a business. And one of the fundamental differences of this is that, of course, if you're self-employed, actually, when you stop working, the money stops.
Yeah.
If you have a business, the income stream can continue. So I was very keen to transition from being self-employed, trainer, coach, into a business with a reliable income stream. So while this was going on, and this is very linked to my actual number one motivator, really, which is the creator. So actually being creative is my training was very innovative. I never just accepted any package as it was. I had to change it. I mean, I'm sure sometimes for the worse, but actually often I felt for the better. I started developing. In fact, during the Investors in People, one of the authorities, Dorset, in fact, commissioned me to write a diagnostic tool which would enable any consultant in the Dorset area to go into any company, give them the diagnostic, and then have a 100% grid of 80% above, you will qualify for Investors in People, 60 to 80, you've got some small changes to make, etc. So I'd already had experience of creating product.
Yep.
And so this led me through my research. It wasn't one moment where I thought, I'm going to create motivational maps. In fact, the name motivational maps, I didn't even invent. I had a ridiculous name for it. I called it the wine list. The wine list was my which stood for work inner needs experience. And I thought this was really clever. But my wife, of course, who is my better part, who is superior to me in every way, said, James, that's a stupid name. You need something better than that. I said, well, like what, Linda? He said, well, what about motivational maps? As soon as I got the alliteration, I thought, something goes better than me. So from that experience, the maps came into existence. And in 2006, we launched it. It was online. Initially, of course, it was a manual thing, but it went online. And the whole product then entered into what I'd call a process of innovation and development. If you were to see what it was originally compared to what it is now, there have been phenomenal changes in the map.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Fantastic to hear. So in terms of working with that, the motivational side of things now, you mentioned briefly there, your top motivator being creator, which is, and some of our listeners will understand what that is. And other people are going, okay, so how does this all work? So I think it's probably best if we just take a little bit of a step back before we get into a little bit of an idea about what these motivators are, is to understand, and you mentioned earlier as well, around motivation being energy. So is it that simple? Am I doing myself out of a podcast here? Am I going to get James Sale just to say, well, it's just energy, so all you've got to do is get energy, done and dusted. There you go. Everybody can go off and be successful.
No, it's not that.
Okay.
Well, it is and it isn't. It's all, it's, at the end of the day, we have to make things simple so everyone gets it. But then, of course, there are levels of complexity around this, which I could go into. But I tell you what I fancy talking about, because you did ask me about its impact on workers as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is a really important issue post-COVID for all of us. Everybody, there's such a lack of energy. There's such a lack of a whole range of things, which we can come on to. So let me share with you, Richard, and your listeners, something original, something I've never written about in the books on motivation. Fantastic. And I've never actually given this in any of my talks. So this is really a first. Your podcast can have something I've not seen before. So in essence, motivation is energy. It's drive. It's a way of moving from A to B in a kind of very electric kind of way. But here's the thing that I think one should be aware of. It's connected with other aspects of our life. And one of these aspects are three very, very important values, what we call virtues. They could even be called theological virtues, in fact, but that's not complicated too much. And it's this. Motivation is connected to these three things in a profound way. The first of these things is it's connected to hope. It's connected to hope, because when we're motivated, we are hoping for something.
Yeah.
It's connected to faith. And if you don't like the word faith, expectations. We expect what we are actually moving towards. If I'm moving towards being creative, I'm expecting to realize that creativity. So my expectation, my belief is that something will materialize in the real world coming from the energy I am bringing to this situation. And the third and surprising thing is that actually motivation is linked to love. Because actually, in a funny sort of way, and being in a state of love, is because actually we're motivated by what we want, what we desire. Yeah. So, in fact, when we talk about the effect of not having motivation and its impact on workers today, the absence of motivation for workers means what? One, no hope. because they're not motivated to do anything particularly. They're just doing a job and there's not any hope in it. Mm-hmm. There's no faith, or to put it more precisely, there's no expectations, or even worse, the expectations are for the worst. We don't expect management or anybody to do anything for us. And there's no love. And what does that mean in practical terms? It means we are no longer people. We are units.
Yeah.
We are units. We are cogs in the machine. And what this leads to, from the point of view of organizational dynamics, it leads to sabotage. It leads to self-sabotage. We've got no hope, no expectations, no love for anything we're doing. So we self-sabotage ourselves. So we underperform at some fundamental level. And it also leads to organizational sabotage, because we resent the kind of companies, the kind of organizations that actually treat us in this way. So the net effect of this is massive loss of productivity.
Yep, absolutely. And it's really interesting, actually. It sort of fits in with, there's lots of information. I think it was Forbes that were talking about it, about quiet quitters. Across the world, 69% of people sitting there just quiet quitting. Wow. I mean, that must just be an incredible impact on everybody and everything involved in it. You mentioned organizations there, the individual initially, I have examples of being in jobs where I've clearly had no hope, faith, or love in any of it.
Yes.
Because, you can feel it sort of almost taking that away from you.
Yes.
It just draws the life from you.
It draws the life from you. And in fact, you mentioning the Forbes study, of course, well, the UK study, the UK itself, since 2008 and the financial crisis, of course, we were at something like 3 or 4% productivity growth every year. We've now gone to way below 1%, if any growth at all. And that's been happening for 15 years. And of course, COVID hasn't helped it. So I don't wish to get political particularly, and I don't mean this politically, in a sense, if we go back to 2008, we were under Labour and now we're under the Conservatives. But essentially, if we're going to solve this productivity crisis, people are at the heart of it. And what we do to people and how we treat people is the only way we can seriously move the dial.
Yeah. Absolutely. So hopefully what we're going to be doing here today is giving people, some more insight to actually be able to, focus on it themselves. Although it's a really interesting thing, because many people I speak to say to me, well, but I don't have a manager who motivates me. I don't have things that motivate me. So is that an issue? How can we go about sorting that out then? Is motivation something?
The first thing we have to insist upon, the first thing in that situation is that, we have to insist upon it can be expressed in various ways, but one way of expressing it would be, am I a victim or not? Now, if we take the victim mindset that somebody else is responsible for motivating us, then we have a problem to start with. We have to insist on individual responsibility for, I think Brian Tracy, the great American Canadian guru, once said, if it's going to be, it's up to me. If it's going to be, it's up to me. Now, it sounds very easy to say that. You could argue there are some people who have to have a job, they have to take it, there's no alternative, etc. But I tend to think when you look at most people, and there's going to be the exceptions, there's going to be those very small, I think it's a small percentage of people where really there is no choice. But in our society, in the UK now, there are always choices we have to make. And one of the most important, which is to do with our self-concept, is, am I a winner or am I a loser? That comes back to the expectations and the faith. Do I believe in myself? Do I believe I'm worth better? So there's actually, and this is a very complex problem, because of course it goes right back to childhood. Our self-concept is partially determined by what our parents or parent did for us. It's partly determined by how our teachers treated us. I mean, the number of horror schools you get from people who've been to a school which has totally destroyed their self-confidence. And it's to do with how employers treat you and how life treats you and how you end up seeing yourself. So to put this in a perspective, our self-concept, which is made up of 3 parts, essentially, I won't go into that now, it's too detailed, and it's in my book, Mapping Motivation. But the self-concept, everybody's got a self-concept, which is either, could put it this way, it's either above the line, 50% above the line, or it's below the line. The thing about the self-concept is it's made up of about approximately 200 mini self-concepts. And these self-concepts are answers to the questions like, I'm no good at maths. I'm very good at maths. I'm no good at languages. I'm very good at languages. I'm no good with people. I'm very good with people. And we actually tell ourselves this in a kind of form of hypnosis on a daily basis. And so for all these topics and subject matters, about 200 of them, actually, we form a kind of average. And if enough of them are, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't do this, actually, we can't. We disable ourselves.
Yeah.
So there's a sense in which there's a real problem with the employer. I get that. And of course, there's a lot more employers can do to create structures which are empowering and energizing. And you using motivational team maps is a classic, brilliant way of doing precisely that. Because when you start really debriefing teams with the maps, you can get into some of this self-concept, self-belief kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, but there is that fundamental thing. Ask yourself, this person. And so, of course, the key thing that can be used from a organizational point of view on the individual is, of course, the coaching mechanism. I mean, coaching can make a profound difference for any individual. Yeah. And one of the things I started my career doing when I went into all this stuff, of course, was appraisal, because that's what I've been trained on. I'd spent 5 years in the educational system going around schools, training head teachers and deputy head teachers on appraisal systems. And actually, this one-to-one, I mean, appraisal's got a bit of a bad rap now because it's been used so badly. It's been done so badly. But of course, there's no reason why it needs to be done. But it can be done brilliantly. In fact, using maps as part of the process can make it and transform it.
Yeah.
But in that one-to-one that the manager has with the employee, that's the point at which you can make a massive difference. But you have one thing you have to, if you think about it this way, you have to think about employees like you think about your own children. That is, if you just beat them up, you're going to get very bad children. If, as you should be doing, you're encouraged, not being, when I say encourage you, because people think you're being unrealistic, not being unrealistic, based on this person's capabilities, what could they be with encouragement, with resourcing, with a vision?
Yeah.
With this kind of abandonment of the negative attitude. One of the biggest, there are 3 things that determine whether change can happen or not. The first is that, do we have a vision? Individually, team, organization, do we have a vision? The second thing is resourcing. And by the way, I can't remember which book it was. I think it's Mapping Motivation for Leadership, but in fact, there are 9 resources and they're listed and explained. There are 9 types of, the obvious resources like money, obvious resources like time. There are more subtle resources as well. Do we have the resources? But the third and final thing that can make such a profound difference, it will determine whether or not the change can happen, is people have got to be dissatisfied with the status quo. If everyone's happy making the money they're making, and this is all great, we don't want change. Of course you don't. You're making money this way. Why would you want to change? But for people who've got low self-esteem, low self-concepts, actually, are they really satisfied? If they're satisfied with it, you'll never change them. But most of them, you find, given a vision of something better, will jump at that chance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. An interesting one for the listeners there. Yeah. What are you getting when you're out there? The other thing, just to go back quickly to, well, I say quickly, they would have to do it quickly, but we mentioned, and for people who aren't quite as aware about sort of the motivators of that we have, you mentioned your top one being that creator motivator. Would it possible just to give us a little bit of an idea about, how many of these motivators are there, and how do they sort of form themselves, or how do we know what we've got?
Yeah. Okay. So basically, for all your wonderful listeners who are tuning into this, there are 9 motivators. Everyone's got all 9 of them in your psyche, to use a neutral word. We've all got 9 motives, but the thing is that makes us different is we've got the 9 in a different rank order and in different levels of intensity, which the scoring reveals. Mm-hmm. And in terms of your behavior, what actually drives you to behave, for most people, but not all, but for most people, the top 3 motivators of the 9 determine what you want and what you respond to. And the ones that are below are far less important. Although, having said which, your lowest motivator can become very significant as a kind of Achilles heel. There's something you're missing in your life which you haven't spotted. But to take my case, to give you the 9 from the bottom up, because they're in a hierarchy, the Maslow hierarchy. The bottom motivator, not bottom in importance, in fact, it's probably the strongest of all of them, but is the defender motivator, which is all about security. You want security in your life. Above that is the friend, which means you want belonging in your life. Then above that is the star, where you want actually recognition in your life. Then we get into the director, where you want control. Then we have the builder, where you want money and material resources. Then we have the expert, where we want learning and expertise. Then we go into the creator, where we want to innovate. Then we go to the spirit, where we want freedom and autonomy. And finally, at the apex of the triangle or the pyramid, we have the searcher, where we want meaning and purpose in our life. And we have 3 of those 9, which kind of will really affect us on a day-to-day basis. So for me, the latest reading for me would be my number 3 would be the spirit. I love autonomy. And number 2 would be the expert. I love learning. And my top one, as I've already said, would be the creator. Mm-hmm. Now, knowing that myself, that these are my 3 top ones. And by the way, my creator is what we call a spike in our jargon. And that means it's not just my top one, it's excessively my top one. It's kind of very, very, very strong. The number system tells you, it's not just impressionistic, it's the numbers tell you this is what drives you. So actually, most people say about me, I'm a pretty motivated person, very highly motivated. And I'm not just highly motivated because I'm going to a network meeting or I'm meeting somebody, so I need to put it on. I'm actually motivated all the time. Mm-hmm. And the reason I'm motivated all the time, barring, of course, I had a cold recently and I was a little bit poorly. So, I had to lie down a bit. But basically, the reason I am actually so highly motivated is because I self-motivate.
Yeah.
Knowing those 3 motivators, I then actively feed them. I actively feed them.
Yeah.
So to just briefly give you a flavor of what that means personally for me. So my creator motivator means I need to innovate. Well, I've already talked to you about the books I'm writing, the products I'm producing. But the thing about innovation and creativity is, so if you say, well, what about recreation, James? Well, it's all about play. I make sure I spend a lot of time. My wife and I, we're serious, but we play a lot. I've just had a new granddaughter from my son. So we go across and we want to play. Yeah. We go to Italy for 2 weeks and we want to play when we get to Italy. We want to do all sorts of playful things. So actually, I ensure there's really loads of play in my life. It's not all work, serious. It's because the creator wants play, wants to be playful and things. My expert, well, this will perhaps give you a challenge. It's about being learning and about being an expert. Here's a challenge for you. So I did a calculation. I mean, aside from my qualifications, aside from the books I write, I read, apparently, it would appear, probably on average now, about 100 books a year.
Yeah.
That's what I read. I read about 100 books a year. And now I'm not boasting about that, except to say that the average number of books the average person in the UK reads per year is less than 1. The average person in the UK reads less than 1 book a year, which is why they don't know anything. I read about 100, and that's, of course, going on courses, doing this, doing that. I recently went on a LinkedIn course. I not only went on the course, I got the course tutor then to give me some personal one-to-one coaching on it. Because I want to know more. So it's an obsession with learning. And as far as the spirit goes, well, let me just share this with you. Autonomy. I like autonomy. So we are a business with 1,400 plus licensees, coaches, consultants, and trainers in 16 countries. But we do not employ 1 member of staff. Now, the director is my lowest motivator. It always has. Never seems to change. In other words, controlling people and resources is something I don't like doing. It's one of the reasons I left teaching. I was a deputy headmaster, and eventually all the managing I was good at it, but in fact, it was wearisome to me to do it. People keep coming up to me wanting to solve their problems. It's wearisome. So, but for some people, if it's number 1, it's great. They love doing it. So for me, we've got a business where the very structure of the business gives me autonomy. I don't have an employee to worry about. We had an employee at the beginning for a couple of years, but it became more, I was working more on keeping the employee motivated than I was keeping myself motivated. So actually, I realized this was not the right kind of thing. We needed not to go down.
Interesting. Now,
go on. Yeah. Well, that's it. So that's just a few brief pointers about, how I just keep making sure that I am not actually being, managing stuff, because that would demotivate me, learning new stuff. Playing. Doing all those.
Love it. So I think it's one of the key things there, isn't it? It's about that it's your job It's your job around this motivational piece there. And when you have that awareness, you're in a better and a stronger position to be able to manage what you do and how you do things and
Absolutely.
play and all of those marvelous things that give you that energy that you spoke about. Interestingly enough, though, and some of our listeners may have picked up on it. Actually, you mentioned a couple of times my latest map. They
Oh,
do
yeah.
change. So talk to us a little bit about that, because with a lot of sort of self-perception tools or inventories that are out there, and there are lots of them, people say, well, I do that and it's pretty much the same every time. Is that not the same with the motivators then?
No, it's not the same with the motivators. And the reason it's not the same is because of the actual structure of where motivation itself comes from. So the motivation in our model, and, we've researched that model, and all that research can be found in the 5 books that are out. But basically, it comes from your personality, which is, relatively speaking, fixed. If you do a personality profile, you've done it once, you don't need to do it twice, because it will remain more or less the same unless circumstances are extreme in the extreme, as it were.
Yeah.
The second thing is, it comes from the self-concept, which is a word I've used before. And the self-concept changes over time. How you see yourself now. My little Isabel, who's 8 months old, my little granddaughter, how she sees her, I'm not sure how she sees herself. She's rolling around and wanting to eat and everything, right? She'll get to be 18 and she'll have a view of herself. She'll get to be 48, I hope. And that view at 48 will be quite different. That self-concept will be quite, so the self-concept changes. But the third ingredient that actually pumps into the motivational profile is our expectations. So, for example, our expectations are beliefs about future outcomes. Now, just to take an obvious example, Richard Knight invites me to do a podcast for him. If my expectation were, Richard Knight, what a waster. That's not going to waste of time. That's going to produce nothing for my business. That's going to be no good for my reputation. How motivated would I be to have an interview with Richard Knight? On the contrary, I'm thinking, great, Richard Knight, he's a really great guy. He's going to be really good. It's going to be so actually, my expectation is talking to Richard Knight is going to be really engaging and energizing, and it's going to be good. So actually my motivation goes up. So what we have is a model where there are 3 things. One is fixed. The other 2 are changing all the time. So we have something like what I'd call a 70-30 balance. Motivation is stable because of the personality factor over usually 2 to 3 years, unless something extreme happens, like you lose a job, you have a divorce, you win the lottery, something extreme like that. Your self-concept will change immediately, your expectations will change, and then your profile will change. And that's the brilliance of it, because it's not static. It's actually a change tool by its very nature. So you need to regularly update to see where you are. So at the moment, Spirit is in my top 3. 16 years ago, Spirit was my number 1. 2 years ago, I think during lockdown, I think actually Spirit was my number 4 and Search had entered my top 3. So I'm very aware of these little shifts that are going on in my own belief systems.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see, you mentioned your granddaughter there. Do you see those life changes that have a significant impact in terms of the motivators and their ordering or their satisfaction levels? How does that work?
Well, I think to answer that question, I would need to go back to the roots of the motivational map. And there are 2 important roots there. And one root is Maslow's hierarchy. Now, the point about the hierarchy is it's changeable. And the point that kind of became associated with Maslow, but was subsequently denied, but, it's always going to be there. It's actually the purpose of our life is to go up the hierarchy. So at the bottom of the hierarchy, we have, in fact, the hierarchy extends further than the maps do, because the hierarchy extends to breathing oxygen, eating food. That's what I call a need. What I'm dealing with are the wants, the desires. Okay. So bearing in mind that qualification, essentially, we start off wanting security, but the most secure thing we can do is to stay where we are and just burrow down. So in fact, we become a much more self-realized human being when we go up through these various levels and we get to the top where we're on a mission.
Hello, hope you're enjoying this episode. When you've finished, why not subscribe to the Motivational Mindset podcast to learn more about motivation in business and beyond? Thanks. Now, back to the podcast.
Like, the Blues Brothers. I'm on a mission from God. Something really important. We're on purpose, and this is the kind of thinking, I guess, of something like the Cynic's book on the importance of why and all this stuff. So at the top end of why, we have the searcher, and it's like there's a progression, and you're getting promoted. Now, that's fine up to a point, but of course, in maps, we say all the motivators and all the levels are equally important, and they're there for a reason. And part of that reason is they're there for survival. Sometimes we need to go into defender mode because we need to be secure, secure in our relationships, secure in our work, secure in our income, secure in a number of things. So the other thing that goes into the maps was, of course, the Enneagram, which is my favorite personality tool. And if you know the Enneagram, you will know that some of its structure has been superimposed on the map. The Enneagram's a tool going back to Homer. It goes back 3,000 years. It's just an amazing thing. And the thing about the Enneagram, of course, is it is, unlike the maps, fixed. So you at birth, to come back to little Isabel, God bless Isabel, it actually has a number. There are 9 numbers. There are 9 personality numbers, and they're in 3 groups of 3, just like the maps. But the thing about the number is it doesn't change. So there is a sense in which there is some permanence in the impermanence of the self-concept and all the flux of life and the environment that's going on around us. There's something actually permanent there in the personality. So I don't know if I've answered your question or not. It's like a yin and yang situation. When you say it's just this or it's just that, it's actually both simultaneously. Yeah.
No, I think it's really great. Thank you. Just in terms of that, the way these things can move, can change. And I think it's the other thing that you mentioned there around those sort of how satisfied are those different motivators as well. And I think this is something that listeners can get their sort of heads around those pieces where some days everything's working really well. You're almost that firing on all cylinders piece. You can feel the energy crackling off you and all of that amazing things. And then, the next day, it's hard work. And this comes back to your point about the whole performance at work piece, and the productivity in the country in general. It's hard work. So, being able to identify, well, why is that? Or even ask yourself those questions. Why am I feeling this way? That for me makes a real difference. And I do on a regular basis. If I sit down and having a chat like this with you now, James, I can feel the energy building in me. I know that when I come off this conversation with you, I'm going to have a fantastic rest of my day because I've drawn that energy as well. I can feel it coming. And if I'm not speaking to people, do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean, but I don't want to put you down here, Richard, but I'll send the invoice immediately.
That's quite all right. There's a value in that. It's not just money, is it? That's fine. I'm comfortable with those sort of things. But I think it's a great thing for the listeners to be able to sort of understand as well that there is that ability to be able to do something about it. You can't just you don't need to let the environment direct the way you're feeling, because to your point earlier on, you have those choices. We can make those choices. You
absolutely do have those choices.
Yeah.
It's very, very important to realize that.
Fantastic. And so when we think about those sort of choices, as we sort of move on through this conversation, how you've mentioned briefly that you do things that keep your motivation high. And you're saying to me, you are a motivated person. So when James has that cold, when James isn't feeling particularly buoyant, what are your go-to things that give you that energy back?
Well, I don't want to sound like a new age hippie here, but actually, when the energy is low for these kind of reasons, of course, it's very, very important to really look after yourself. Okay. So here we have a whole range of things, but of course, the practice of meditation, quiet meditation. I use something called a holosync, which is a tape with subliminal messages so it takes you down from beta to alpha to theta to delta waves. Yoga. I do a lot of yoga. And I have other things as well. Like I have infrared sauna blankets where, I bathe myself in infrared rays, which are incredibly energizing. Oh, wow. So, I do a lot of, and of course, eating well. Hot food as opposed to salady stuff, because you're not feeling so well. It's easier to digest nice warm food. My wife, fuss of me. I make a fuss of her when she's not so good. So those kind of things, you look after yourself. You don't try to keep going. You stop going and you look after yourself. And you're sitting down and reading a good book for the afternoon rather than getting onto the computer and solving problems on the computer. Sit and have a good read. Expert motivator. I'm doing it, but I've got an excuse to do it. Spirit motivator. Oh, I've got nobody telling me what to do and having to explain myself. I'm not feeling well. It's enough for me to autonomously generate my own kind of bubble. So that's the kind of thing that I do. And so there's going to be times when you don't have that massive energy. And so, the thing to do is to note it. And we'll perhaps come back to this a bit later on when you question me further. But I think you note it. And then, you actually, that wonderful line from the Bible, love your neighbor as yourself. But actually, most people forget what it means is that you've got to have loved yourself first. Yeah. You can't love your neighbor until you have loved yourself. You've got to look after yourself. It's a bit like those things on planes where they tell you, that make sure you've got your inflatable thing on first before you try to help other people. Because if you don't have your inflatable thing on, helping other people is just going to drown you both when the plane crashes. So you've got to love yourself first, and then you've got some love to give other people.
Yeah, absolutely. That works really well. I mean, when you speak to, a lot of people around how their motivational mindsets work as well, very, very similar thing. It all starts from inside. It's got to be, you moving forward. Just an interesting one that sort of come across my mind whilst we've been talking there, and the different motivators, and you're talking about your creator side of things. So if somebody sat there going, and I'm pretty sure I've got a high builder motivator. I like the money, I like the quality of life. How does that work then? Does somebody then just go out and make more money to give them motivation, to give them energy?
No, you see, I think this is, a word or two words we haven't talked about, which is connected to the Motivational Maps process. It's not enough to be able to tell people what their profile is. That in itself is just information.
Yeah.
It's not going to change the world having lots of information. We've already got far too much information, and it seems to be having a negative effect rather than a positive one. No, what we've got to have is, given the information, what do we do? And the answer is, the two words we haven't yet mentioned are reward strategies.
Yeah.
We actually have to have a series of reward strategies. And as you know, we have a whole booklet, a large booklet, a large booklet of ideas and strategies to help each of the profiles. Mm-hmm. So in the case of the builder, one of the number one motivators for the builder is self-motivating as well as management motivated is to actually set goals. Mm-hmm. The builder is extremely goal orientated. I am not myself particularly goal orientated, and you wouldn't think so from what I do, how I do it, and how I spend my time. I'm not goal orientated. It doesn't mean that much to me. Although all the literature says, "Oh, have goals." Yeah, but actually, I prefer living with the visions. I prefer all the visionary stuff. To chunking it down to goal level is not what I like. But the builder loves goals. And you can set goals for anything. You can set goals for your health, your well-being, your relationships, your work. And the other thing to understand about the builder is it's not just they love goals. So, do a review of their goals, revise your goals, have a new look at your goals. Hey, New Year's coming, New Year's resolutions, or New Year's goals. The thing about them that is particularly, of all the 9 motivators, the builder is the most competitive.
Yeah.
So one of the things about the builder, it's right in the middle. It's 5 up from the bottom and 5 down from the top. It's bang in the middle of the hierarchy. So the thing about being competitive is, when you set your goals and think about your goals, you might want to set them, whether it's overt or covert, in terms of how you beat or get better than somebody else. You go running with a partner and how you want to run further or run faster. You're in sales, how you make more than the rest of the team. By the way, that's not such a good idea if you're the team leader making more than the rest of the team. But you know what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah.
In context, setting goals is really motivating for the builder motivator.
Great. Now, fantastic. And it just gives that little bit more clarity around those, because often, and it's something that I used to hear many, many times when I was in big corporate roles, is, where the managers were the first thing they do in a coaching conversation is, so what motivates you? And you sit there and sort of scratch your head if you don't know anything about motivational maps or motivation generally, and sort of go, well, money. I suppose,
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
need that, don't I? And
Well,
that's why I work.
yeah. Well, we need to understand, Richard, as I know you do, but of course, most people, given the fact that we've done now well over 100,000 maps worldwide, well over 100,000 maps worldwide. And I've actually personally dealt with thousands of them, if not tens of thousands or 10,000 of them by now. The thing about it is, we understand is, and considering of the 1,400 plus licensees of maps, of which there is a large proportion of coaches, and considering the fact that coaches are the most well-informed kinds of people about this kind of stuff. I mean, your average person working in a company is not that well informed about this stuff, but coaches tend to be well informed. If I were to say to you, most of the coaches that I personally have trained or have come to me, and I said to them before they've done a map, do you know what your top 3 motivators are? And they say, oh yeah, of course. And they tell me what they are based on our system, or they predict what they are. Most of them get one out of 3. So even highly educated people can't actually or don't actually know what the emotional drive is. And of course, what they tend to do when they say they like money, it's like everything else. They like having a pizza on a Friday afternoon. They come down to specific tangibles rather than the underlying principles that the map are revealing.
Yeah, it's a great system. That really does enable that self-awareness, but I think also that then leans towards the idea that it's a great way of being able to have a similarity of language or familiarity of language to be able to have those conversations. And again, from a coaching point of view, we mentioned that this motivation, it's us, it's ours, we own it, and we're going to work on it. But also there are the tools to be able to allow managers and coaches to be able to have great conversations that are based around what motivates us, rather than those elongated conversations of trying to work out where someone's coming from. I've done coaching myself in the past, and when I first started, I'd spend hours asking questions and not going anywhere in a coaching conversation.
Yes.
It's almost like I could feel the energy draining from me, and let alone the person I was coaching, inverted commas. I could see them rolling their eyes and go, what are we doing here? Well, for what purpose? So having something that is more tangible, if you like, giving it a number, giving motivation a percentage. Some people will say, oh, you can't do that. But actually, to your point, James, you
can. You absolutely can. And by the way, Richard, I've got to tell you on this, one of the things when we started doing this back in 2006, really, it quite surprised me. I mean, I've actually worked with quite a significant number of accountancy practices.
Oh, yeah.
Accountancy practices. I mean, of course, they loved it because I was giving them a number. I mean, this is the weird thing about it. Actually, so if you go into financial services, accountancy, actuarial, or whatever, any of these kind of things, anyone that works with numbers and thinks that's the only reality in life, because let's be honest about it, it's a delusion. It's a delusion that numbers and science will explain everything. They don't. There's a lot in this heaven and earth, the more than your philosophy dreams of a ratio, I think it was Hamlet said. So, basically, but they found it really compelling. You could make a proposition. Look, let me come in and I can give you some numbers about your staff. I mean, numbers about this stuff. I mean, really mind blowing. So if you're a motivational mapper and you're listening to this, or you're a coach and you're thinking, well, how do I get into accountancy practices? I think you will find having something like this tool, which is numbers based, but then with all this touchy feely outputs, which you can action, is really compelling.
I love it. Yeah, absolutely. It does. I mean, I've had experience of it myself with firms, etc., and they definitely do, because it just gives people that permission to talk about this sort of stuff as well.
Yes,
because business, as we know, is very they talk about it a lot, but actually how much they talk about feelings and emotions and all of those great things internally that drive us, they very rarely actually do and make a difference with it, sort of touch that top part, but never really get down into the deep part about it. So it's a great way of doing that. So as we move on through our conversation, what difference has this motivational mindset made to you throughout your career and your days on this fine planet that we all reside in?
Yeah, well, how much longer? Who knows? I think that's a great question, and we've got to limit it all. But so the first thing, the difference it's made is it's given me a massive energy increase. Now, the thing about energy is, this of course has a huge effect on everything, because not only how you feel in yourself, but of course, we're all attracted, if we're healthy people, we're all attracted. And when I say healthy, I mean psychologically healthy people. all attracted to high energy people.
Mm-hmm.
It's a kind of charisma that you develop. So this has all sorts of effects in your private life in terms of your friendships and your relationships. But of course, from a business perspective, you become a much more attractive proposition. Mm-hmm. People want that energy from you. And that's what the original feedback I got as a trainer was. I suddenly realized that people weren't buying my expertise, my knowledge. What they were buying was the energy that I brought to the room, that actually people went away and felt really motivated to implement the kind of ideas I had. But the ideas I had were secondary to the feeling of being energized. So massive energy. The second thing, a word we haven't really, I think, mentioned yet, or maybe we have, but only in passing. Of course, the formula that we have about motivation is a feature. People don't buy features. What they buy is benefits. Mm-hmm. What is the benefit of having massive amounts of energy, motivation? And the answer is you become a performer. Your performance increases. Now, this is an absolutely crucial thing because, as a matter of fact, our whole life is determined by how we perceive ourselves as performers, the self-concept, and how others perceive us. Mm-hmm. We cannot meet another human being within 30 seconds, forming a judgment as to whether or not we like them or dislike them, whether we think they can deliver or not deliver, whether they're a performer or not a performer. Mm-hmm. Now, the thing is, and I won't go into the formula now, it's just will take too long, but basically this makes you a high level performer, which makes you attractive again to other people in your personal life, but also, in fact, remember Winston Churchill, if you want to get something done, ask a busy man. When you start becoming high performers, everyone comes to you to do more for them, but also in terms of your career. If you're a high performer, people want somebody, because what does it mean? It means you get results. You get results. Mm-hmm. And this means, of course, is that your productivity increases. So I would regard myself as a highly productive person in terms of the things I've outputted over throughout my life in a way, but certainly since Motivational Maps came onto the scene, I've had an absolute spike in terms of productivity. Yeah. Writing books, writing articles in America, poetry collections have been out and reviews, running the map, setting up the new 5 elements communication styles diagnostic. In fact, what it leads to really with this level of productivity, as long as you're not overdoing it, which I don't think I am, it leads to what we would call a full life. A full life. So that is what the motivational mindset produces.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. So I think as we move towards the end of our conversation here, it sounds like, you're an energized, motivated individual, which is absolutely fantastic to hear. You alluded to this previously as we opened up our conversation, but around the future, this marvelous changing world we find ourselves in, ever changing. In fact, blimey, who knows? What do we need to be mindful of as we move, say, into next year, as we move into the next 5 years or so, from that motivational point of view?
Yeah, we'll only do one thing, just one thing. I'm going to reduce it because, of course, we could talk about a dozen things here. One thing I think, here is the one thing I think you must do next year and for the next 5 years. Do not take your eye off the performance ball, in inverted commas. Mm-hmm. You see, what we're witnessing in our society at the moment, and particularly at corporate level, is we are becoming obsessed in terms of our work with other issues. So, companies advocating values, saving the world, creating utopias. In fact, there's a brilliant thing that came up recently with Terry Smith. Terry Smith is a genius investor with an investment fund that's huge. He's effectively he's the UK Warren Buffett. Mm-hmm. And he had a stake. He owned 10%. Is funded of Unilever, and he went out to say he was fed up with because of course they are underperforming as a company. The Hellman Mayo, where the Hellman have created this kind of mission statement about what Hellman Mayo mayonnaise actually means. Yeah. And he said, well, this company's been running since 1913. The customers have already worked out the purpose of Hellman's Mayo. Spoiler alert. Salads and sandwiches, and so people are spending all this time and money getting really clever, and they're not focusing on performance. And so the Unilever share price has slumped, and because they're spending all this time doing nonsense. So It's not that values are bad. It's not that saving the world isn't a good thing. It's not that utopias are in themselves bad. Although, to be honest, after 5,000 years of people trying to create utopias and they all lead to repression and oligarchy, I can't see much point in it. So stay with performance, stay with direction, motivation, skills, stay with the core elements that make up performance. And actually, when you go into your clients, help them perform at a higher level, get yourself performing at a higher level rather than, gluing yourself to the road in protest about this, that, and the other, which actually I regard as being completely irrelevant to what we're trying to do with people, because they don't feel better about themselves. They just become harpies and trolls who just simply waste time. So that's the key thing. As we go into this new world, don't believe all this stuff. Stay with performance. Feel good about yourself. Perform at a high level.
Fantastic. And, what a great message to end on for our podcast here today. And I'm sure there's lots of business leaders and owners and managers that they're listening are going, absolutely. Yeah, let's focus on this performance piece. And, when we do that, the motivation can come with it. And let's keep focused on that as well in terms of our
motivation, performance, productivity, and results, outcomes, good outcomes for people, good outcomes for teams, good outcomes for companies, shareholders happy. We're doing something, we're making a difference. Actually, it's all about the real searcher thing. We're really trying in our own little way, wherever we are, we can make a big difference rather than trying to change the world. It's just, to me, common sense.
As usual, James, I could sit here and chat to you for hours and hours and hours. But unfortunately, we're going to come to an end for our podcast today. Number one, the first podcast having you on, the man, the myth, the legend, the motivational grandfather guru himself. So, Mr. James Sale, thank you ever so much. And if anybody needs to get in contact with you, what's the best way of them contacting you or finding out what you do and all that lovely stuff?
Well, thank you for that. Well, there's loads of websites. There's Motivational Maps website for a start off. There's the James Sale website for a start off. But actually, to contact me directly, the best email address would be james@motivationalmaps, one word, .com. Motivationalmaps.com. Motivationalmaps.com would be the best email address to contact me directly.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. And being open to that, to having chats with other people, I'm sure that they will jump at that opportunity to hear more about this motivational mindset you've got. And, thank you for explaining around Motivational Maps.
Well, I'm really grateful to you, Richard, for inviting me. It's been so easy and it's been such a pleasure doing it. It's really fabulous. And let's hope it gets some traction next year. And what you're trying to do with motivation and Motivation Switch is a huge success. I know it's going to be, because you're a pretty savvy operator. So I think it's going to be very good. And I look forward to seeing your success coming up in 2024.
Thank you very much, James. And it's been, again, pleasure to speak to you. And cheerio to all our listeners. Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
This was a Switch Motivation production from Switch Performance Limited. Music by Dennis Kischuk from Pixabay. The Motivational Mindset Podcast. Download, listen, subscribe.